You think you know how this goes. Desperate guy, rich billionaire, a contract with strict rules. No touching, no feelings. 30 days and my debts are wiped clean. I signed the dotted line because I thought I was broken. A 24-year-old dud who never presented. Safe. Immune to alpha biology. But nature doesn't care about NDA agreements. And when my temperature spiked on day 22, locking my bedroom door was the worst mistake I could have possibly made. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon polish and cold hard cash. I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my entire miserable life, staring at a stack of papers thicker than a phone book. My hands were shaking. I hid them under the mahogany table, digging my fingernails into my thighs to ground myself. Across from me sat Roman Hayes. He didn't look like the kind of man who needed to buy a husband. He looked like the kind of man who owned the building we were sitting in. Probably because he did. Roman was all sharp edges and tailored wool, his dark hair neatly parted, his jaw set in a permanent line of mild irritation. He was an alpha. You didn't need to smell the faint oppressive scent of ozone and cedar rolling off him to know that. You just had to look at the way he took up space. The air in the room seemed to bend around him. Let's review Clause 4, subsection B. Roman's lawyer drone a beta with a nasal voice and a cheap suit. Physical contact. In public, you are expected to portray a newlywed couple deeply in love. Hand-holding, waist-holding, and brief chase kisses are permitted. In private, you maintain a minimum distance of 3 feet. No scenting. No uninvited touching. Mr. Hayes's private quarters are off limits. Roman checked his Rolex. He hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. Does he understand the penalty for breach of confidentiality? I'm sitting right here, I said. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat, forcing the gravel out of it. I understand. I talk to the press, I go to jail, and I owe you $500,000. I get it. Roman finally raised his eyes. They were a pale, startling gray. Cold, calculating. He wasn't looking at a person. He was looking at an asset, an acquisition. Good, Roman said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in the glass of water sitting between us. You want your father's gambling debts erased, Leo. I want the board of directors to stop threatening to oust me from my own company because of my unstable bachelor lifestyle. 30 days. We smile for the cameras we attend 3 charity galas. We finalize the Hayes Tech merger. Then we file for a quiet annulment due to irreconcilable differences. You walk away clean. I stared at the pen resting on the contract. $500,000. The loan sharks had broken 2 of my ribs last month. Next month they promised to break my hands. I picked up the pen. The metal was cold. I signed my name, Leo Davis, soon to be Leo Hayes, for a month. Welcome to the family, Roman said dryly. Moving day was a joke. I packed my life into 2 duffel bags. Roman sent a black SUV to pick me up from my moldering apartment in the dampest part of the city. The driver didn't speak to me. Roman's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower downtown. It was massive, stark white, and completely devoid of personality. There were no photos, no clutter. Just expensive, abstract art floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the smoggy skyline and furniture that looked deeply uncomfortable. Your room is down that hall, Roman said, not looking up from his tablet as I stood awkwardly in the foyer. He was pouring himself a glass of scotch at a marble island. The housekeeper comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. The fridge is stocked. Do not touch the thermostat. We have a dinner with the board tomorrow night at 8. Wear the navy suit my assistant left on your bed. I dropped my bags. The heavy thud echoed in the cavernous space. That's it, I asked. No. Make yourself at home. Roman took a slow sip of his drink. He finally looked at me, his gaze dragging from my scuffed sneakers to my oversized thrift store sweater. This isn't a home, Leo. It's a staging area. Learn your lines, hit your marks, and stay out of my way. I laughed a short, bitter sound. Don't worry, boss. I'm practically invisible. I walked down the hall to my assigned room. It was the size of my old apartment, dominated by a king-size bed with sheets wound so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. I sat on the edge of the mattress. It was soft. Too soft. I was 24, unpresented. The doctor said some people were just born with dormant genetics. I never had a heat. I never emitted a scent beyond regular boring human sweat. The alphas I'd met treated me like a broken toy, and the omegas pitied me. I was a biological dead end. But sitting in a billionaire alpha's sterile penthouse, holding a marriage certificate that essentially declared me his property for 30 days, I realized something. Being broken was my best defense. Roman Hayes didn't want an omega. He wanted a prop. And a prop doesn't feel anything. Day 4. The Metropolitan Children's Charity Gala. The cameras were a physical assault. Flashes exploded in my face, temporarily blinding me as I stepped out of the limousine. The red carpet felt like a minefield. Reporters screamed Roman's name, shoving microphones over the velvet ropes. Roman, Roman. Is this the new husband? Where did you two meet? Look this way. Leo. I froze. A microphone bumped hard against my shoulder, and a particularly aggressive paparazzi lunged forward. Suddenly, a heavy, warm hand clamped onto the small of my back. Roman stepped seamlessly between me and the cameras. He didn't push anyone. He just occupied the space with an immovable authority. The scent of ozone and cedar spiked rolling over the crowd in a subtle wave of warning. The reporters physically took a step back. "Smile!" Roman murmured, his lips barely moving. His breath brushing the shell of my ear, I plastered on a smile that felt like it was cracking my face in half. Roman's hand remained on my spine, his thumb resting against the dip of my waist through the expensive fabric of my suit. The heat of his palm was shocking. It was the first time we'd touched since the awkward handshake at the lawyer's office. My heart did a strange, heavy stutter. A hot flush climbed up my neck. I attributed it to the sheer panic of the crowd. Inside the ballroom, the charade continued. Roman introduced me to a parade of old men in tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds. I played the part perfectly. I was demure polite and smiled at Roman like he hung the moon. Whenever a board member looked our way, Roman would touch me a hand on my knee under the table, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. Every touch felt like a static shock. By midnight, my jaw ached from smiling. We stepped into the private elevator going up to the penthouse. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the lobby. Instantly, Roman dropped his hand from my waist. The warmth vanished, leaving a cold patch on my back. He unbuttoned his collar, rolling his shoulders. The mask fell off. He looked exhausted. "You did well," he said to the elevator doors. "I'm an excellent liar," I replied, staring at my reflection in the polished metal. We walked into the silent penthouse. Routine had already set in. He went to his study. I went to my wing. But that night, my skin felt tight. I tossed and turned on the Egyptian cotton sheets. My lower back ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm. I figured I had pulled a muscle being so tense at the gala. Things began to shift around day 12. I woke up early, driven out of bed by a relentless thirst. I padded into the kitchen in my sweatpants to find Roman standing by the espresso machine, looking like death warmed over. His tie was undone, his hair actually messy. "Board meeting prep?" I asked, grabbing a glass of ice water. He grunted, glaring at the machine like it had personally offended him. "The Japanese delegation is pushing back on the merger terms. I haven't slept in 36 hours. I watched him. The untouchable billionaire looked incredibly human in that moment. The cynical voice in my head told me to walk away. Not your problem. But my feet stayed planted. "That machine makes garbage coffee," I said. Roman raised an eyebrow. "It's a $10,000 Italian import, and it burns the beans." I walked past him, acutely aware of the minimal distance between us. I grabbed a battered French press I'd bought at a thrift store and brought with me. "Sit down. I'll make you something that won't taste like battery acid." For a second, I thought he was going to snap at me. Instead, he just sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose, and sat at a stool. I boiled the water. I ground the beans. The silence in the kitchen wasn't heavy anymore. It was just quiet. When I pushed the steaming mug across the marble counter, Roman took a sip. His eyes fluttered shut for a brief second. "Better?" I asked. "Passable." He lied. But he drank the whole thing. "You're changing your soap," Roman said, abruptly looking at me over the rim of the mug. I frowned, drying my hands on a towel. "No, I'm not. Using the same unscented crap that you stock in the guest bathroom." Roman's brow furrowed. He leaned forward slightly, his nose twitching. "There's a smell. It's sweet, like overripe fruit. I noticed it in the car yesterday." Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. "I don't smell like anything," I snapped, stepping back. "I'm a beta Roman, or a broken omega, whatever you want to call it. I don't produce pheromones. I know what I smell," he said, his voice dropping a fraction. His gaze dragged down my neck, landing on my scent gland. It felt like a physical touch. "Well, you're hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Drink your coffee." I turned on my heel and walked fast toward my room. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I locked the door behind me and practically ran to the bathroom mirror. I tilted my neck. The pale skin over my scent gland looked completely normal. No swelling, no redness. I was 24. It was impossible. He was just tired. But as the days ticked on, the symptoms became impossible to ignore. The dull ache in my back spread to my thighs. I was constantly annoyingly warm. The penthouse felt suffocating. And worst of all, my senses were sharpening to a terrifying degree. I could smell Roman everywhere. His scent wasn't just ozone and cedar anymore. It was a complex map of his moods. I knew when he was stressed because the air felt heavy and sharp, like an impending thunderstorm. I knew when he was relaxed because the cedar note became warm, like sun-baked wood. I found myself lingering in the living room after he left for work, sitting on the sofa cushion, where he had just been sitting, breathing in the lingering ghost of him. I caught myself doing it on day 18 and practically vaulted off the couch in self-disgust. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I berated myself, splashing cold water on my flushed face. "It's a transaction. You're just stressed." I popped 2 ibuprofen and ignored the way my hands were trembling. We only had 12 days left. I just had to hold it together for 12 more days. Day 22. I woke up feeling like someone had poured boiling water into my veins. A choked gasp tore from my throat as a vicious cramp seized my abdomen. I curled into a tight ball, clutching the expensive sheets in white-knuckled fists. My skin was on fire, slick, with a thick, heavy sweat that soaked through my t-shirt. I tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back onto the mattress, my vision swimming with black spots. The air in the room felt thick. It took me a full minute to realize I was smelling my own scent. It wasn't a subtle shift anymore. It was an explosion. Bruised peaches, dark honey, and something raw, feral, and desperately needy filled the bedroom. I couldn't breathe through it. Every breath I took just fueled the fire, burning in my lower stomach. No, 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 no. I dragged myself out of bed. My legs felt like wet noodles. I hit the hardwood floor, the cold shock of it providing a split second of relief before the fever rushed back hotter than before. I crawled toward the bathroom, whimpering in the back of my throat. This wasn't supposed to happen. Late bloomers existed, sure, but a first heat at 24 was unheard of. The doctors had told me my biology was dormant. Dead. It wasn't dead. It had just been waiting. Waiting for what? A trigger? A catalyst. Roman. Living in close proximity to a dominant alpha, smelling him every day, wearing his clothes, sleeping under his roof. My stupid dormant biology had finally woken up, and it was pissed off about being asleep for so long. I managed to pull myself up to the bathroom sink. The reflection in the mirror made my breath hitch. I looked wrecked. My pupils were blown wide, nearly eclipsing my irises. My lips were swollen cherry red and parted as I panted for air. And my neck, the scent gland on the side of my throat, was angry, raised, and pulsing with a deep, furious pink. Another cramp hit me, forcing a pathetic whine out of my mouth. I hated that sound. I sounded weak. I sounded like prey. I reached up and locked the bathroom door. Then I dragged myself to the bedroom door, my fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. Click. I was safe. The contract said Roman's side of the house was his, and mine was mine. He was at the office. He wouldn't be home until 8. I could ride this out. I just needed to hide. I dragged the heavy duvet off the bed, curled into a corner of the closet, and built a nest out of pillows and dirty laundry. I shoved a t-shirt into my mouth to muffle my own pathetic whimpers. I lost track of time. Hours blurred into a haze of agony and a crushing hollow ache that demanded to be filled. Then the front door of the penthouse opened. It was only 3 p.m. The heavy, solid thud of Roman's dress shoes echoed in the foyer. Even through 2 locked doors and 50 feet of hallway, my sharpened senses picked him up instantly. The son of ozone crashed into my system. My body reacted violently. A slick pool of heat rushed between my thighs, and a whimper tore past the t-shirt stuffed in my mouth. I heard Roman pause. The footsteps stopped. "Leo," his voice called out. It wasn't his usual crisp, detached boardroom voice. It was deeper, thicker. I pressed my hands over my ears, curling tighter into a ball, shaking violently. "Go away. Please go away." The silence stretched. I knew what was happening out there. The penthouse ventilation system was circulating the air. My scent-sweet, cloying, desperate, unbonded Omega was flooding the apartment. He was an alpha. It was hitting him like a physical blow. Footsteps fast and heavy pounded down the hardwood floor toward my wing. "Leo!" Roman barked. He rattled the handle of my bedroom door. It held. "Open the door." The command was laced with raw alpha authority. It vibrated in my teeth. My inner Omega practically screamed at me to obey, to throw the door open and submit. But my cynical, rational human brain fought back. Go away!" I managed to shout, my voice cracking horribly. "Clause. Clause 4. No touching. Stay away from me." Roman slammed a fist against the heavy oak door. The wood shuddered. To hell with the contract, you're in heat. A violent one. Open the damn door, Leo, before you hurt yourself. I'm fine. I lied immediately, letting out a ragged sob as another wave of fever racked my body. You are a terrible liar, Roman growled. The smell of ozone pouring under the crack of the door was turning into something darker. The smell of lightning right before it strikes. The smell of an alpha whose territory and mate, even a fake one, were in distress. Leo, step back from the door. Roman, please don't crack. The sound of splintering wood echoed like a gunshot. Roman didn't ask a second time. He kicked the door right off its hinges. The heavy oak slammed into the drywall, leaving a massive dent. I flinched, burying my face in my knees in the dark of the closet. I heard him cross the room. He didn't even bother with the closet doorknob. He just ripped the sliding door off its track. Light flooded my dark little nest. I squeezed my eyes shut, trembling violently, trying to press myself backward into the drywall. Don't! I choked out a tear, finally spilling over my lashes, hot and humiliating against my cheek. Don't touch me. We had a deal. Roman stood over me. His chest was heaving. He had ripped his tie off, and his crisp white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. His pale gray eyes were entirely blown out, completely black with instinct. The civilized billionaire was gone. He dropped to his knees in the pile of blankets. The deal, Roman whispered, his voice a dangerous velvet purr as he reached out, is suspended. His hand clamped onto my trembling shoulder. The heat of his skin against mine was an explosion. I gasped, arching up off the floor, my hands instinctively flying up to grip his wrists. I meant to push him away. Instead, I pulled him down. My hands gripping his wrists were meant to be a barrier. They became anchors instead. Roman's weight settled over me, caging me against the back of the closet. The darkness was suffocating, thick with the smell of my own panicked biology and the crackling ozone of his. I couldn't see his face properly in the shadows, just the gleam of his dark eyes and the sharp angle of his jaw. Leo. His voice was a rasp, stripped of every ounce of boardroom polish. I choked on a breath, my spine arching against the drywall as another cramp hit my stomach. It felt like my organs were being twisted into a knot. I didn't know, I swear. They said I was broken. You're not broken. Roman shifted his knees, bracketing my hips. He didn't crush me, but his presence was absolute. You're burning up. He moved one hand from my shoulder to the side of my neck. His thumb brushed over the swollen, angry skin of my scent gland. The contact was like dropping a lit match into a powder keg. I let out a sound that I didn't recognize, a high, thin keen that vibrated in my chest. My hips jerked forward entirely on their own, chasing the heavy heat of his body. I hated myself for it. I hated the weakness. I squeezed my eyes shut, fresh tears leaking out, and bit down hard on my lower lip to keep from making that pathetic noise again. Don't do that, Roman murmured. His hand moved to my jaw, his thumb gently but firmly pressing against my chin until I released my lip. It was bruised. Don't fight it. It'll tear you apart. The contract. I sobbed, clinging to the only piece of logic I had left. I sounded insane. I was writhing on the floor of a closet, drenched in sweat, quoting a legal document to a billionaire. Clause 4. You touch me, you forfeit. I'll pay myself the 500 grand, Roman growled. He didn't wait for me to argue. He slid his arms under my knees and my back, lifting me off the closet floor in one fluid motion. My head fell back against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat through his ruined dress shirt. It was hammering fast and erratic. Roman carried me out of the wreckage of the closet and dropped me onto the center of the king-sized bed. The mattress bounced softly. Before I could even attempt to crawl away, he was following me down. He stripped his shirt off. The buttons popped a few, scattering across the hardwood floor with tiny, sharp clicks. I had never seen him without a perfectly tailored suit. His chest was broad, heavily muscled, and covered in a faint sheen of sweat. He looked like something carved out of stone, but he felt entirely like fire. When his skin finally met mine, a long, shuddering gasp tore out of me. The agonizing pressure in my lower back eased by a fraction, replaced by a desperate hollow ache that demanded more. "Please," I whispered. I didn't even know what I was asking for. I just wanted the fire to stop consuming me. Roman braced his forearms on either side of my head. He looked down at me, his chest heaving. The civilized man was fighting a losing battle against the alpha instinct. I could see it in the tight clench of his jaw, the white-knuckled grip he had on the bedsheets. "Look at me, Leo," he commanded softly. I forced my eyes open. My vision was blurry with fever. "I need you to say yes," Roman said. His voice was shaking. Roman Hayes, the man who coldly laid off thousands and broke rival companies without a flinch, was shaking. "Biology is a bastard, but I won't take you if you tell me to stop. Tell me to walk out that door, and I will lock you in here, and I will call a doctor. Tell me to leave." My body screamed in protest at the mere suggestion. The heat flared a sharp stabbing pain in my abdomen that made me arch off the mattress. I grabbed his shoulders. His skin was slick. "Don't go," I whimpered, dragging my nails down his back. "Don't leave me. Please." A low rumble started deep in Roman's chest. It was a purr, heavy, territorial, and entirely satisfied. The sound vibrated through my own chest, settling my frantic heartbeat into a steady, heavy rhythm matching his. He didn't hold back anymore. His mouth crashed down on mine. It wasn't the chaste, calculated kiss we shared for the cameras. It was devouring. He tasted like Scotch coffee and raw need. My lips parted willingly, and the moment he slipped inside my mind, just surrendered. The cynical voice that told me this was a transaction, a mistake, a disaster simply short-circuited. I tangled my fingers in his dark hair, pulling him closer, chasing the friction of his heavy body against mine. He stripped me of my sweat-soaked clothes with an efficiency that would have been terrifying if it hadn't felt so profoundly necessary. Every touch was a live wire. When his mouth dragged down my jaw and lingered over the pulsing scent gland on my neck, my breath hitched. I waited for the sharp pain of teeth. The mark, the permanent branding that would tie a destitute 24-year-old to a billionaire for the rest of his life. But Roman didn't bite. Instead, he opened his mouth and dragged his tongue flat over the swollen gland, soothing the angry heat with his saliva. He bathed the gland in his scent, layering heavy cedar and ozone over my dark honey and peaches. It was a claiming, but a temporary one, a thick, suffocating blanket of protection. The relief was instantaneous and overwhelming. I cried out my hips, bucking up to meet him. "I've got you." Roman breathed against my neck, his hands gripping my hips, holding me steady. "I've got you, Leo. Let go." I shattered. The fever broke in a spectacular, blinding wave of pleasure that wiped my mind completely blank. I clung to his broad shoulders, sobbing his name, into the quiet of the penthouse, utterly consumed by a man I was supposed to be leaving in 8 days. I woke up to the sound of rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a long, confusing minute, I just stared at the gray light filtering through the glass. My body felt incredibly heavy, like I had been beaten with a bag of sand. Every muscle ached. My throat was raw. And I was warm. Too warm. I shifted, and a heavy arm tightened around my waist, pulling my back flush against a solid bare chest. Memory slammed into me with the force of a freight train. I stopped breathing. I stared down at the arm slung over my stomach. The skin was tanned, dusted with dark hair, and smelled so strongly of cedar that it was practically seared into my nostrils. I slowly, carefully tilted my head back. Roman was fast asleep. He looked younger. The permanent furrow between his brows was gone. His dark hair was a mess falling across his forehead. His jaw was relaxed. In sleep, he didn't look like a CEO. He just looked like a man. A wave of absolute terror washed over me. What did you do? I carefully lifted his heavy arm, holding my breath, and slid out from under him. The cold air of the bedroom hit my bare skin, making me shiver violently. I grabbed the duvet, wrapping it tightly around my shoulders, and stumbled backward. The bedroom was a disaster zone. The closet door was splintered and hanging off its hinges. The heavy oak bedroom door was propped against the hallway wall. My clothes were scattered across the floor like debris. I looked down at myself. My thighs were bruised with the shape of Roman's grip. My neck. I dropped the duvet and sprinted to the master bathroom, slamming the door shut. I braced my hands on the marble sink and looked in the mirror. I looked like a ghost. But my eyes immediately dragged down to my neck. There were no puncture wounds, no permanent bite mark. But the skin over my scent gland was dark red, almost purple, heavily bruised from where Roman had suckled and scraped his teeth. I rubbed my fingers over it. My skin felt sticky. I smelled entirely of him. If I walked into a room, no one would smell Leo Davis. They would only smell Roman Hayes' territory. I slid down the bathroom door, pulling my knees to my chest, and buried my face in my hands. It was a biological fluke, an accident. He was an alpha. I went into heat. It was just an exchange of bodily fluids, dictated by a genetic flaw I didn't know I had. It didn't mean anything. You begged him not to leave, my brain helpfully reminded me. You cried his name. Shut up, I whispered to the empty bathroom. I stayed on the floor for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to put the armor back on. How to walk out there and be the cynical, untouchable prop he had paid for. I had to treat this like a business complication. Nothing more. A soft knock on the bathroom door made me flinch. Leo. Roman's voice was low, slightly raspy from sleep. Are you all right? I cleared my throat, forcing myself to stand up. Fine, I called out. My voice sounded like sandpaper. I'm fine. Just taking a shower. I brought you some water and painkillers. They're on the nightstand. There was a pause. Don't lock the door again. I didn't answer. I turned on the shower, letting the water scald me red, scrubbing my skin with the unscented soap until it hurt. I was trying to wash the cedar off, but it felt like it had seeped into my pores. When I finally emerged wrapped in a thick terry cloth robe, Roman was sitting in an armchair by the window. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. He looked uncomfortably domestic. The glass of water and 2 pills sat on the nightstand, exactly as promised. I walked over, picked up the pills, and swallowed them dry. There's a shattered door in the hallway, I said, staring at the floor. You should probably have your assistant call maintenance. You can deduct the cost from my final payout. The silence in the room grew heavy. Look at me, Roman said. I kept my eyes fixed on the grain of the hardwood. I'd rather not. I think we should just... Leo, look at me. It wasn't an alpha command this time. It was a request. I raised my chin. Roman's gray eyes were intensely focused on my face. He wasn't glaring. He was studying me. "Are you in pain?" he asked quietly. "Just a headache." "I didn't bite you," he said, stating the obvious. "You were vulnerable. I wasn't going to make a permanent decision for you while you were out of your mind with fever." "Right, good. Thank you for your restraint." My tone was sharp defensive. I hated how much it hurt to hear him say it. He didn't want to be permanently tied to you, obviously. "So we're good. The contract holds. 30 days. We have 8 left. I can handle 8 days. Roman stood up. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. I instinctively took a step back, my back hitting the edge of the bed. He stopped giving me space, but his presence was towering. "Is that what you want? To pretend this was just a logistical hiccup? It was a logistical hiccup, Roman." I lied, my voice shaking. "I had a freak biological reaction. You helped me out. It's fine. We don't have to talk about it. Let's just stick to the script. That's what you paid me for." Roman stared at me for a long time. His jaw tightened. The faint scent of ozone sparked in the air, betraying his calm expression. "Fine," Roman said, his voice dropping to a glacial chill. "We stick to the script, but you're staying in my wing for the remainder of the month. Your room is a biohazard, and you will not leave this penthouse until your scent settles. The press would have a field day if they smelled you right now." He turned and walked out of the bedroom. I let out a shaky breath and sank onto the edge of the bed. The sheet still smelled like him. I pulled a pillow onto my lap and dug my fingers into it. I had gotten exactly what I asked for. The contract was intact. I was safe. So why did it feel like I had just signed my own death warrant 6 days left? The heat had fully broken by day 26, leaving me physically drained, but mentally sharp. The problem was the script was impossible to follow now. Before the fake marriage was a performance of apathy, masked by polite smiles. Now it was a live wire. We had to attend the final dinner with the Hayes Tech board. This was the finish line. If Roman locked down the merger tonight, his position was secure, my debt was paid, and we could quietly file for divorce next week. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing room, adjusting the collar of my charcoal suit. Roman had ordered it specifically for tonight. The fabric was heavy, expensive, and restrictive. I applied a thick layer of concealer over my neck. The bruise over my scent gland had faded to a dull yellow, but it was still visible if you looked closely. The makeup covered the color, but it couldn't cover the smell. I still smelled like Roman. The temporary marking was fading, but my own dormant scent had permanently woken up. Instead of smelling like nothing, I smelled like dark honey laced with heavy territorial cedar. I smelled like I belonged to him. Roman walked into the dressing room. He was wearing a pitch-black suit that made his gray eyes look almost silver. He stopped behind me, looking at my reflection in the mirror. "Ready?" he asked. His tone was perfectly neutral. He had been like this for 4 days, polite, distant, and maddeningly professional. "As I'll ever be," I replied, grabbing my watch. My hands were shaking slightly. Roman stepped closer. He didn't touch me, but the heat radiating from his body warmed my back. He reached out and gently brushed a stray smudge of concealer from my collar. "You look fine," he murmured. "Just stay close to me tonight." The drive to the restaurant was silent. The dinner was held in a private room at an obscenely expensive steakhouse downtown. There were 12 board members, mostly older alphas and betas, who looked at me with varying degrees of suspicion and polite boredom. We sat at the center of the long mahogany table. Roman was in his element, commanding the room with effortless authority. He discussed quarterly projections and stock options, while I pushed a piece of Wagyu beef around my plate and smiled when appropriate. "So, Leo," a voice boomed from across the table. I looked up. It was Mitchell, the chief financial officer of the tech firm Roman was absorbing. Mitchell was a massive alpha built like a linebacker, with a red face and a loud grating laugh. He had been staring at me all night. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell," I said politely. "I was just telling Roman here it's quite a surprise. He's always been a solitary wolf. Never pegged him the marrying type. And you're a quiet one, aren't you?" Mitchell leaned heavily on the table, his eyes gleaming. "I prefer to listen," I said, offering a tight smile. Mitchell took a long sip of his wine. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. "You know the rumors said Roman married a beta, a paper pusher. But sitting here—" Mitchell smirked, his eyes dropping to my neck. "You certainly don't smell like a beta. You smell quite ripe." The entire table went dead silent. It was a gross violation of etiquette. Commenting on an Omega's scent in a professional setting was borderline harassment. Commenting on a bonded Omega's scent was a challenge. My stomach plummeted. I instinctively raised a hand to my collar, shrinking back in my chair. Roman didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He slowly set his wine glass down. The soft clink sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Roman turned his head to look at Mitchell. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The air suddenly grew heavy thick with the suffocating metallic tang of ozone. Several of the betas at the table physically winced, pressing back into their chairs. "Mitchell," Roman said softly. Mitchell's smug smile faltered. He puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his own alpha presence, but against Roman, it was like a match trying to outburn a forest fire. "Just making an observation, Roman," Mitchell said, his voice losing its boom. Roman reached out and placed his hand on the back of my neck. His long fingers curled around my nape, his thumb resting deliberately over my scent gland, directly over the fading bruise. It wasn't a protective gesture. It was absolute ownership. "Your observations regarding my husband's biology are unwelcome," Roman stated, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "If you cannot keep your focus on the merger parameters, you will be removed from this room and permanently severed from the board. Do we have an understanding?" Mitchell turned pale. The sheer oppressive weight of Roman's pheromones was forcing him into submission. "Understood. My apologies, Leo." Roman held his gaze for 3 agonizing seconds before breaking it. He withdrew his pheromones as quickly as he had unleashed them. The room collectively exhaled. Roman's hand remained on my neck. His thumb stroked the skin beneath my collar, a slow rhythmic movement that sent a shiver straight down my spine. I looked at him completely bewildered. Roman wasn't looking at the board anymore. He was looking at his plate, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He was furious. Not because Mitchell had insulted a prop, but because Mitchell had insulted me. For the rest of the dinner, Roman didn't let go of me. If his hand wasn't on my neck, it was resting heavily on my thigh under the table. It was a blatant, possessive display that completely contradicted our agreement. When we finally got back to the penthouse, the silence felt different. It wasn't cold anymore. It was volatile. Roman threw his keys onto the marble island. He shrugged off his suit jacket, tossing it over a stool, and loosened his tie. "You didn't have to do that," I said, standing awkwardly in the foyer. "With Mitchell. I could have handled it." Roman spun around. His eyes were dark flashing with residual anger. handled it by shrinking into your chair and letting him humiliate you. It's fake Roman. I snapped, the exhaustion and confusion finally boiling over. He was right. I am a paper pusher. I'm a prop. We only have 6 days left, and then none of this matters. You didn't have to go full territorial alpha on him to protect a business asset. You think this is still about business? Roman closed the distance between us, his voice rising. Of course it is. You paid me. I yelled back, stepping away from him until my back hit the cool glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. You paid me to pretend, and I'm doing my job. So stop. My voice cracked. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest. Stop touching me, like you actually mean it. Roman stopped 3 feet away from me. The exact minimum distance stipulated in Clause 4. He stared at me, his chest heaving. The anger drained out of his face, replaced by something much more dangerous. Desperation. What if I do mean it? Roman asked quietly. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. You're a liar. I am a lot of things, Leo, Roman said, taking one slow step past the 3-foot boundary. But I have never lied to you. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against my cheek. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. 6 days. Roman murmured, his thumb trailing down to the line of my jaw. We have 6 days left on the contract, and I'm going to spend every single one of them proving to you that I am going to tear that piece of paper to shreds. Day 25. I woke up to the smell of burnt toast. It wasn't the sharp, acidic smell of the $10,000 espresso machine misfiring. It was actual cheap grocery store bread turning to carbon. I dragged myself out of bed, pulling my oversized sweater tighter around my shoulders. My muscles still carried the dull ache of the heat, a heavy reminder of what had happened in this very room a few days ago. I walked into the kitchen. Roman was standing by the stove in gray sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt, glaring at a standard plastic toaster. Smoke was curling out of the top slots. I think it's dead, I said, leaning against the door frame. Roman jumped slightly, turning to face me. He looked flustered. I had never seen Roman Hayes flustered. He was a man who negotiated hostile takeovers before lunch. Now he was being defeated by a kitchen appliance. The housekeeper usually handles breakfast, Roman muttered, running a hand through his messy dark hair. I told her to take the rest of the week off. I didn't want strangers in the apartment while your scent was still settling. I crossed my arms. So you're trying to cook. I can cook. Roman defended, though he immediately grabbed a pair of tongs to fish the blackened squares out of the toaster, dropping them directly into the trash can. I just don't understand the settings on this cheap thing. I had Thomas buy it yesterday. I stopped. You had your driver go buy a cheap toaster. Roman avoided my eyes. He walked over to the marble island and pushed a small brown paper bag across the surface. He also went to that terrible corner bodega near your old apartment, the one with the barred windows. I walked over and opened the bag. Inside were 2 bags of cheap generic brand coffee beans, the exact kind I had brought with me when I moved in, the ones I had complained about running out of 3 days ago. I stared at the beans. My chest felt tight. Roman, I started, my voice carefully guarded. Don't, he interrupted. He leaned his hands on the counter, looking at me with a startling intensity. Don't analyze it, Leo. Just drink the coffee. This was the new normal. For the past 3 days, ever since the dinner with Mitchell, Roman had systematically dismantled every boundary the contract had built. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He just quietly, methodically started taking care of me. He canceled his weekend trip to Chicago. He worked from the dining room table instead of his office. His laptop opened his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, just so he could be in the same room as me. Whenever I walked past, he would reach out just a brief touch, a hand on my elbow, a brush of knuckles against my spine. It was terrifying. I knew how to handle violence. I knew how to handle indifference. I grew up with a father who gambled away our rent money in loan sharks, who communicated with brass knuckles. I understood transactions. You give me this, I give you that. But this gentle domestic alpha behavior, I had no armor for it. I made the coffee in my battered French press. I poured 2 mugs and slid one across the counter to him. He took a sip, grimaced slightly at the bitter taste, and then drank it anyway. We need to talk about the gala on Friday, I said, retreating to the safety of logistics. It's the final public appearance, day 29. The press is going to be everywhere because of the merger. Roman set his mug down. The relaxed domesticity vanished, replaced by the sharp-focused CEO. You don't have to go. We have enough public photos. The narrative is secure. The contract says 3 galas, I replied stubbornly. Roman sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Leo, stop hiding behind the contract. It's a piece of paper. It's the only reason I'm here, I shot back. The words hung in the air, harsh and ugly. I immediately regretted them, but I couldn't take them back. My cynical defense mechanism was working overtime. Roman looked at me. His gray eyes were unreadable, but the faint scent of ozone in the kitchen grew heavy, tinged with a sharp note of sadness. Right, Roman said quietly. He stood up, taking his mug to the sink. I have a conference call in 10 minutes. If you need anything, I'll be in the study. He walked away. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the cheap toaster, feeling like I was the one burning from the inside out. I spent the next 2 days trying to rebuild the walls. I stayed in my wing. I kept my distance. But the problem with biology is that it doesn't care about your emotional baggage. My dormant omega genetics had woken up, and they had latched onto Roman. Every time he walked into a room, my pulse settled. Every time I smelled his cedar scent, the constant low-level anxiety that had plagued my entire life evaporated. My body knew he was safe. My brain was just desperately trying to convince my body that it was a trap. On the evening of day 28, I was sitting on the living room sofa reading a book I wasn't actually absorbing. Roman came out of his study. He was wearing a dark suit, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted. He didn't go to the kitchen. He walked straight over to the sofa and sat down next to me. He didn't leave the mandatory 3 feet of space. His thigh brushed against mine. I stiffened, closing the book. A rough day. The merger's fully signed, Roman said. He leaned his head back against the sofa, closing his eyes. It's done. The board is happy. The stock is up 12%. Congratulations, I said, my voice hollow. You got exactly what you wanted. Roman turned his head to look at me. The distance between our faces was agonizingly small. Did I? He reached up his fingers, brushing the hair away from my forehead. His touch was so gentle, it made my throat ache. Leo, Roman whispered, stop running. I'm not running. I lied, my voice shaking. I'm just waiting for the clock to run out. Roman's jaw clenched. He dropped his hands, sitting up straight. Fine, if that's what you want. He stood up and walked toward his bedroom. The gala is tomorrow at 8. Wear the black suit. I watched him go, the heavy silence of the penthouse pressing down on me. The countdown was almost over. Day 29. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I picked it up. It was an alert from my banking app. Incoming wire transfer, Hayes Holdings, LLC. Amount $500,000. Status cleared. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. It was there. The money. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was freedom. I could pay off my father's loan sharks today. I could buy a car. I could rent a decent apartment. I was safe. I dropped the phone on the bed and immediately threw up in the master bathroom. I rinsed my mouth out my hands, gripping the edges of the marble sink so hard my knuckles were white. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked exactly the same as I did 29 days ago, but everything felt fundamentally broken. I walked out to the living room. Roman was already there. He was sitting at the dining room table fully dressed in his suit for the evening's gala. In front of him was a manila folder. He wasn't looking at his phone or his laptop. He was just staring at the folder. I walked over slowly. My bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floor, but he knew I was there. The air in the room was thick with ozone cracking with tension. "The money cleared," I said. My voice sounded loud in the quiet room. "I know," Roman said. He didn't look up. He pushed the manila folder across the smooth surface of the table toward me. I looked down. Printed on the crisp white legal paper inside was the word annulment. My stomach plummeted. It was exactly what we had agreed upon. It was exactly what I had been demanding for the past week. "The lawyers drafted it this morning," Roman said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Irreconcilable differences. The marriage was never consummated. It's a clean break. The press release goes out tomorrow at noon." I reached out with a trembling hand and opened the folder. On the bottom line, where Roman's signature was required, the ink was already dry. He had signed it. A cold, hollow feeling expanded in my chest. He signed it. He was letting me go. The billionaire got his merger, and now the prop was being discarded. My cynical brain screamed, "I told you so. I told you it was fake." "There's a pen right there," Roman said, finally looking up. His gray eyes were blank. Dead. "Sign it, and you're free, Leo. You can pack your bags. Thomas will drive you wherever you want to go. You never have to see me again." I picked up the heavy silver pen. It felt like it weighed 10 pounds. "You're making it easy," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Just like that. Transaction complete." Roman stood up abruptly. The chair scraped harshly against the floor. "Don't put this on me," he snapped, the dead facade finally cracking. "You are the one who spent the last week treating me like a disease. You are the one who keeps throwing the contract in my face. Because it's the truth," I shouted, slamming the pen down on the table. "You bought me, Roman. You bought me to save your company, and then my stupid biology screwed up the plan, and you felt obligated to fix it." "Obligated?" Roman's voice dropped to a lethal growl. He closed the distance between us, towering over me. "You think I held you while you burned through a heat? Because I felt obligated? You're an alpha," I yelled, stepping back. "It's instinct. You smelled an unbonded omega in distress in your territory, and your brain just reacted. It wasn't me. It was just biology." "Bullshit," Roman fired back. "My biology didn't make me buy your terrible coffee. My biology didn't make me cancel $1 million meeting just to sit in a room with you because you look sad. You are terrified of anyone actually giving a damn about you, so you're hiding behind a contract to push me away." "I am protecting myself," I choked out. The tears finally spilled over hot and humiliating. "Because tomorrow the heat haze wears off. Tomorrow you realize I'm just a broke 24-year-old high school graduate with a gambling addict father, and you're the king of the city. I am not going to let you discard me." "I am not discarding you," Roman roared. The sheer force of his voice shook the windows. "I signed the paper to give you a choice. If you stay here, if you choose me, It has to be because you want to, not because of a threat, not because of a debt, because you want me." He pointed to the folder. "Sign it." Roman breathed, his chest heaving. "Sign it and leave, or tear it up and stay. It's your move, Leo." I stared at him. The scent of ozone was suffocating, mixed with a deep primal panic that was radiating from him. He wasn't just giving me a choice. He was laying himself bare. But I was too terrified to believe it. I grabbed the pen. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely grip the metal. I pressed the tip to the paper and scribbled my name next to his. Roman watched me do it. I saw the exact moment something inside him shattered. The heavy alpha scent in the room simply vanished, replaced by a cold, dead emptiness. "Done," I whispered. "Pack your things," Roman said. His voice was a flat line. He turned his back to me and walked into his study, shutting the heavy oak door behind him with a quiet, definitive click. I packed my 2 duffel bags in 10 minutes. I didn't take any of the suits he bought me. I didn't take the expensive watch. I left the penthouse exactly the way I had entered it, broke carrying thrift store bags and completely alone. Thomas was waiting in the lobby. He didn't say a word as he loaded my bags into the trunk. "Where to Mr. Hayes?" Thomas asked as I slid into the back seat. I looked at the glass tower rising into the smoggy sky. "It's just Davis," I said. "Take me to the First National Bank downtown. I have a debt to pay." Day 30. The motel room smelled like stale cigarette smoke and bleach. It was a vast improvement from my old apartment, but it felt like a prison cell compared to the penthouse. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at a stain on the carpet. The loan sharks were paid. $500,000 transferred directly to a greasy middleman in a diner at 3 p.m. yesterday. They told me I was a good kid and promised never to break my ribs again. I was free. So why did I feel like I was dying? It wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical reality. Without Roman's scent, my body was going into withdrawal. The temporary mark he had left on my scent gland had faded completely, leaving my own dark honey scent to sour into something sharp and distressed. My back ached. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I just sat on the bed, staring at the muted television, waiting for the phone to ring. I was waiting for Roman to come find me. In all the cheap romance novels and stupid movies, the alpha always chased the omega down. They kicked down doors, made grand declarations, and dragged them back to the nest. But Roman didn't come. The news broke at noon. I watched it on the motel TV. Billionaire Roman Hayes announces quiet annulment. There was a brief statement about irreconcilable differences and mutual respect. No scandals, no leaked photos. He had kept his word. He had protected me from the fallout. He had given me exactly what I asked for: autonomy. As the sun started to set, painting the cheap motel room in bruised shades of purple and orange, the truth finally broke through my cynical armor. Roman wasn't coming because Roman actually respected me. He wasn't ruled by his instincts. If he was, he would have bitten me during my heat and tied me to him forever. He would have tracked my scent to this motel and dragged me back. But Roman Hayes was a man who understood the value of a choice. He knew that if he forced my hand, I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I was just a captive to biology. He was waiting for me to choose. I looked at the 2 duffel bags sitting by the door. I didn't even unpack them. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my mind was suddenly incredibly clear. I grabbed my jacket and walked out of the room. I didn't call Thomas. I hailed a yellow cab. I sat in the back, watching the city lights blur past my heart, hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I was walking back into the fire. I was giving up my armor. When the cab pulled up to the glass tower, the doorman looked surprised to see me, but he didn't stop me. He scanned my old key card. Roman hadn't deactivated it. I stepped into the private elevator. The ride up to the penthouse felt like it took 3 lifetimes. The doors slid open. The penthouse was pitch black. No lights were on. The silence was absolute. Panic flared in my chest. What if he wasn't here? What if he had left the city? I walked into the foyer, dropping my bags on the marble floor. The heavy thud echoed in the dark. "Roman," I called out. My voice trembled. Nothing. I walked further in, heading toward the living room. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw him. He was sitting on the sofa, silhouetted against the city lights shining through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just staring out at the skyline. The air in the room was heavy, so heavy with the scent of distressed cedar and dark ozone that it was almost hard to breathe. He was hurting. He didn't turn around when I entered. "I told Thomas to leave your key card active until midnight," Roman said. His voice was a low, rough gravel. "Just in case you left something behind." "I did," I said. Roman finally turned his head. Even in the dark, I could see the sudden tension in his jaw. He set the glass down on the coffee table. "What did you forget?" I walked slowly across the living room. I didn't stop at the 3-foot boundary. I walked right past it, stepping between his knees as he sat on the sofa. I looked down at him. The untouchable billionaire looked broken. His eyes were shadowed, his hair a mess. "I forgot my husband," I whispered. Roman stopped breathing. He stared up at me, his gray eyes searching my face, looking for the lie. He was looking for the debt, the obligation, the fear. "The debt is paid," I said, my voice steadying. "I'm broke. I'm living in a terrible motel. The contract is void. I have absolutely no logical reason to be standing here." Roman's hands came up, hovering just inches from my hips, afraid to touch me. "Then why are you—" "Because I'm an idiot," I said, a wet, breathless laugh escaping me. "Because I spent my whole life thinking I was broken, and the only time I ever felt whole was when I was terrified you were going to walk away from me. I don't want the annulment, Roman. I want you." A ragged sound tore from Roman's throat. His hands closed around my waist, gripping me hard enough to bruise. He pulled me down. I fell into his lap, straddling his thighs. The impact knocked the breath out of me, but before I could recover, his mouth was on mine. It was a collision of desperation and relief. He tasted like scotch and tears. I tangled my hands in his hair, pulling him closer, chasing the heat that I had been starving for all day. The scent in the room shifted instantly. The distressed ozone sparked into something warm golden and overwhelmingly protective. My own scent flared in response, the dark honey sweetening wrapping around his cedar, until you couldn't tell where one started and the other ended. Roman broke the kiss, his chest heaving against mine. He dragged his face along my jawline, pressing his nose against my scent gland. I shuddered, tilting my head back, offering it to him completely. "Are you sure?" Roman growled against my skin, his breath hot on my neck. "No contracts, no escape clauses. You do this, Leo, and you are mine, permanently." "I know." I breathed my fingers, digging into his shoulders. "Do it." Roman's jaw opened. I felt the sharp prick of his teeth against the bruised skin of my neck. I didn't flinch. I pushed back against him, meeting him halfway. He bit down. The pain was sharp, a sudden blinding spike that made me cry out, but it was immediately swallowed by a rush of heat and absolute overwhelming clarity. It felt like a tether snapping into place, anchoring my soul to his. The emptiness in my chest was filled instantly flooded with his presence, his strength, his love. Roman held me tightly as I rode out the shock of the bond, his hands tracing the line of my spine, soothing the tremor in my limbs. He gently licked the bite mark, sealing it, claiming it. We sat there in the dark for a long time, the silence of the penthouse no longer cold, but complete. "You're making the coffee tomorrow," Roman murmured into my hair, his voice heavy with sleep and satisfaction. I smiled, resting my head against his chest, listening to the steady, unbreakable rhythm of his heartbeat. "Deal," I said. Did Leo make the right choice returning to the penthouse, or should he have embraced his independence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you felt the tension of this fake marriage turned real, bond smash that like button to let the algorithm know. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow Omegaverse and romance drama fans, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new story. We've got plenty more intense, emotional, and grounded romances coming your way next week. See you in the next one.